All right, so we are starting with section 3, transporting cargo safely. So let's start with the sentence that says, the bolded part that says, whether or not you load and secure the cargo yourself, you are responsible for these following 4 bullet points. So make note of these 4 bullet points because this is what you are responsible for. You're responsible for inspecting your cargo. You're responsible for recognizing overloads and poorly balanced weight. So making sure the weight is accurate and balanced, and making sure your cargo is properly secured, and knowing your cargo does not restrict your access to any emergency equipment. So there may be a question that asks you what you are responsible for. Even if you don't load it yourself, you're still responsible for those 4 things. So then 3.1, inspecting your cargo. So there's 3 points where you check your cargo, and they're bolded here. So the first one is as part of your pre-trip inspection. So you make sure that your truck is not overloaded, the cargo is balanced, that it's secure. The second check is after starting your trip. You inspect the cargo and everything that's securing it, straps, and so on. And you do this, pay attention to this, specifically this number. So you, after starting your trip, you check it within the first 50 miles after beginning a trip, just to ensure that after you started the trip, nothing is out of place or come loose. And then the third part is just recheck. So you recheck the cargo and securing devices as often as necessary to keep the load secure. But they actually give you 2 bullet points here that you should take into consideration. So the first bullet point is after you've driven 3 hours or 150 miles, you should recheck. So make note of those numbers. So after you've driven 3 hours or 150 miles, you should recheck your cargo, make sure it's secured. And then the other bullet point just says after every break. So that's, so yeah, pay attention to those numbers, 3 hours and 150 miles. So you check it within the first 50 miles of beginning a trip, and then every 3 hours and 150 miles after, or 150 miles after that. So then 3.2.1 just has some general definitions that you should know. So just make note of each of these. Some of these we've already covered, right? The gross vehicle weight rating, gross combination weight rating. So chances are that will be on the test because it was in section 1 and it's here in section 3. There's also the gross vehicle weight and the gross combination weight. So the ratings are going to be what the manufacturer says is the limit. And then the weight without rating after it is going to be what it actually is. So make sure you know those definitions. Axle weight, tire loads, the maximum safe weight that a tire can carry at the specified pressure. Suspension systems have a capacity rating. Couplings have a capacity rating as well. So just make sure you're mindful of those. So now we'll go over to page 65 and we'll talk about legal weight limits. So 3.2.2, make note of of this paragraph. So you must keep weights within legal limits, and states have maximums for the gross vehicle weight and gross combination weight and axle weight. So states determine those legal limits. It says often maximum axle weights are set by a bridge formula. And so I have this underlined. A bridge formula permits less maximum axle weight for axles that are closer together. And this is to prevent overloading bridges in roadways. And then the next paragraph kind of explains that overloading can have bad effects on steering, braking, and speed control. So make sure you make note of those 3 points that, what are some of the bad effects of overloading? Well, steering, it affects your steering, braking, and speed control. And it says overloaded trucks, I have all this highlighted. Overloaded trucks have to go very slowly on upgrades. It says worse, they may gain too much speed on downgrades. So your stopping distance increases. when you're carrying cargo. And it says brakes can fail when forced to work too hard. And we've learned how to brake if that happens. So that's just kind of a reminder there. It says, the next paragraph says, during bad weather or in mountains, it may not be safe to operate at the legal maximum weight. So there may be a question that asks you when it is not safe to operate at legal maximum weight. And that's going to be if you're driving through the mountains, simply because it affects, or it could affect your speed and impact your brakes, and bad weather, right? If there's bad weather out, that can impact, and we may want to have a lighter load that we're carrying if it's bad weather, snow and ice. So 3.2.3 talks about do not be top heavy. And I would just direct your attention to the 4th line that says have to swerve. The end of that, it says it's important to distribute the cargo so it is as low as possible. And this is to prevent us being top heavy. So make note of that. When we load our cargo, we want it to be as low as possible. We're not necessarily stacking height first. 3.2.4 talks about balancing the weight. You're going to hear this word balance a lot, and you may even have a test question on it, because it says here, poor weight balance can make the vehicle handling unsafe. And so too much weight on the steering axle can cause hard steering and can damage the steering or the tires, but also underloaded front axles can cause the steering axle or cause issues with steering. And so, too little weight on the drive axles causes poor traction. So it's important to know that, and this is mentioned elsewhere, I think, that vehicles drive best. These vehicles drive best when they have weight. Again, we don't want to be overloaded and have too much weight. But putting good weight on the drive axles actually allows there to be better traction. So that's what it's talking about there in 3.2.4. So yeah, it says underloaded front axles can make the steering axle weight too light to steer safely. Too little weight on the driving axles can cause poor traction. So now let's look at blocking and bracing. So 3.3.1. So just make note of what this is. So blocking is used in the front, back, or sides of a piece of cargo to keep it from sliding. That's what blocking is. And blocking is usually shaped to fit snugly against the cargo. And so it is secured to the cargo deck to prevent cargo movement. That's what blocking is. And then bracing. So bracing, and it gives you the definition right after it, is used to prevent movement of cargo. Bracing goes from the upper part of the cargo to the floor and or the walls of the cargo compartment. So that is bracing. So you may be using blocking and bracing essentially to ensure your cargo doesn't move, doesn't shift. So then 3.3.2 talks about cargo tie downs. And specifically, let me direct your attention to, if we go down the lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th line that starts with proper type and proper strength. So you want to make sure that your tie downs are of the proper type and proper strength. It says after that, federal regulations require the aggregate working load limit of any securement system used to secure an article or group of articles. They must be at least 1/2 times the weight of the article or group of articles. So make note of that number, 1/2 times the weight. Then it says that the next paragraph says that cargo should have at least 1 tie down for each 10 feet of cargo. So you have to make sure you have enough tie downs to meet this requirement. But it also says no matter how small the cargo, it should have at least 2 tie downs. So you may also see the words minimum. So you may see questions that ask you, what is the minimum number of tie downs you must have for your cargo? Well, the minimum number is always 2. If you have footage that is, more than 20 feet, then you're having at least one per 10 foot. So it may ask you, you're transporting cargo that is 40 feet long. How many tie down should you have? And how many would that be?
40 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
10 feet, actually, so it'd be 2 times 4, 8.
It would only be 4. So 1 per 10 feet.
Oh, 1 per
10 feet. Yeah.
Okay.
And but the minimum you would have is 2.
Okay.
So that's the formula. So 1 per 10 feet, but the minimum number, no matter how small the cargo, is 2.
10 feet. So yeah, 40 it will be 4.
Mhm. So yeah, they'll give you a variety of numbers and just make sure you're able to recognize
Okay.
that formula for how many tie downs you should get or have. So let's flip over to page 66, and it talks about header boards and just what these are. So these header boards, they're front end header boards. It says here the name of them are headache racks. But the goal is for them not to give you a headache, right? So they protect you from your cargo in case of a crash or an emergency stop. So that's the purpose of header boards. And then 3.3.4 talks about covering your cargo. And it says there's 2 basic reasons to cover your cargo. So make note of these 2 reasons. It's kind of funny, it actually gives 3 reasons. So even though it says 2, so let me direct your attention to this 3rd reason as well. So the first reason is to protect people from spilled cargo. That first bullet point. Then the second bullet point, to protect the cargo from the weather. And then the third is just clarifying that protection is a safety requirement in many states. So the third reason is because it's required. So they should have just made that a 3rd bullet point. But it says spill protection is a safety requirement in many states. That'd be a 3rd reason for covering your cargo. So next it says you should look at your cargo covers in the mirrors from time to time while driving. And a flapping cover can tear loose, uncovering the cargo and possibly block your view or someone else's view. This is why we want to ensure our cargo covers are secure while driving.
Yeah, especially like that movie Final Destination.
Yes, yes, yes. Don't want any of that to happen for sure. So 3.3.5 talks specifically about sealed and containerized loads. Let me just direct your attention to not the first paragraph, but the second paragraph, which is just one line that says, you cannot inspect sealed loads, but you should check that you do not exceed gross weight and axle weight limits. And so, so these containerized loads, they, you may see them like on trains, right? That the big rectangle, things that are transporting, we don't know what's inside, right? All kinds of goods may be in there. And they, also transported via ship, right? Big container ships. And so a lot of these may be sealed and locked, and you as the driver don't have the ability to inspect it because it's sealed and locked until it gets to its destination. Mm-hmm. But you still have a responsibility for making sure that you don't exceed your weight limits. So make sure you make note of that. You're still responsible for that. And then the last part of this section, 3.4, just talks about cargo needing special attention. So just make note, there's 4 of them here. So dry bulk tanks is one type of cargo that needs special attention because they have a high center of gravity and can shift. Hanging meat in a refrigerated truck can be unstable because it also has a high center of gravity and can shift. Livestock, so livestock is a 3rd type of cargo needing special attention because they can move around. And then the final one is oversized loads. So if you have an oversized load, sometimes you may need to have a special permit and you may be restricted to when you're able to drive. And you've probably seen them, right? The trucks, they say on the front, oversized load. Some loads also require a police escort or a pilot vehicle in front that lets you know, hey, an oversized load is coming through. So those are the 4 types: dry bulk, hanging meat, livestock, and oversized loads. So just make sure you can recognize those. Those are the 4 types of cargo needing special attention. And that concludes section 3. So that rounds out